I stood in Owen's office, clutching a folder brimming with victories, metrics that screamed success, numbers that should have shouted my worth. I wasn't angry when I walked in. I was proud, hopeful even. My name's Marinla, and for 3 years, I'd led the strategic accounts team at Veritas Tech. 5 major contracts, each one larger than the last, had culminated in the most profitable quarter our division had ever seen. I'd earned this moment. A raise wasn't about greed, it was about fairness. A recognition of what I'd built. So I scheduled a one-on-one with Owen, the new VP of Operations, to make my case. Owen had been with the company barely a month. Young, sharp suit, expensive pen, zero context for the blood, sweat, and late nights behind my team's results. I figured the numbers would speak for themselves. Numbers don't lie, do they? I walked in, sat down, and opened my folder. Client retention, 98%. Contract growth, 24%. Client satisfaction scores off the charts. I'd streamlined a project that once took 6 months down to 8 weeks. Saving thousands in overhead. Owen nodded as I spoke, his face a mask of polite professionalism, but his eyes were elsewhere, darting to his watch, the door, then back to me with a smile that felt like a formality. It was like he was waiting for something, or someone, to interrupt. When I finally said it, I'd like to discuss a possible salary adjustment, the air shifted. He folded his hands, leaned back, and said, "Of course, let's explore that. I'll loop in our." His voice was smooth, but I caught it, a flicker in his expression, a tightening of his jaw, like I'd brushed against something I wasn't meant to touch. I thanked him, stood, and headed for the door, still holding on to the hope that he just needed time to process. But when I opened it, I stopped dead. There, just outside, stood Jamie, the intern I'd trained 3 weeks ago. Fresh out of college, nervous in her oversized blazer, clutching a notepad like it was her anchor. She was waiting to see Owen. Our eyes met, and she offered a weak smile, barely holding my gaze before looking away. I walked past her, my mind screaming at me to stay calm. Don't jump to conclusions, I told myself. It's just timing, just coincidence. But my gut whispered otherwise, and the hope I'd carried into that office dimmed, like a light fading behind frosted glass. 3 days passed. No response from Owen, no calendar invites, no follow-up. I told myself he was new, probably swamped with onboarding chaos. Maybe HR was slow. Maybe my raise request had triggered some bureaucratic red tape. But something felt wrong, like a chord struck just off key. On the 4th morning, my inbox pinged with a message from our subject, role adjustment discussion. Hi Marin, please stop by conference room B at 10:30 this morning. Best, Lena, our. No explanation, no context, just those vague words, role adjustment. I brushed my blazer, straightened my blouse, and walked to the meeting with my head high. I figured it was a formality, maybe even a preliminary approval for the raise. But when I stepped into the room, Lena was already seated, her expression unreadable, hands folded over a printed document. "Hi, Marin," she said, her voice overly chipper. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." I sat, placing my notebook on the table, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. She began, flipping through pages. After a recent realignment of internal structures, leadership has decided to reposition a few roles across departments for better agility and cross-functional collaboration. Her words sounded rehearsed, like she was reading from a corporate script. I waited for my name, my raise, anything. Then came the line that twisted my stomach. "You've been reassigned as executive support, special tasks, effective today." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what does that mean?" "It means you'll be assisting with scheduling, meeting prep, materials coordination," Lena replied, avoiding my eyes. "You'll be a great asset supporting the leadership team from an operational standpoint." A pause stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. My mouth went dry. "No one told me anything," I managed. "Am I still on strategic accounts?" Lena hesitated. "You'd have to check with Owen on that, but as far as the system goes, your access to CRM and client channels has been revoked as of this morning." Revoked. The word hit like a slap. I nodded slowly, my composure a fragile shell, and left the room on autopilot. Back at my desk, my screen greeted me with a cold truth. I clicked the CRM system I'd used daily for years. Access denied. I checked the internal org chart. My name was gone from strategic accounts. Worse, the new structure listed Jamie Tran, client lead, East Region. The intern I'd trained now held my accounts, the ones I'd brought in, nurtured, fought for. I stared at the screen, numb, my fingers hovering over the mouse. What had I done wrong? Was it my tone in the Raise meeting? Had I overstepped? I scrolled through my inbox, half expecting an apology, a clarification, anything. Nothing. Just meeting invites for catering, booking rooms, printing handouts. My phone buzzed. A one-line message from Jamie, I didn't know until this morning either. My throat tightened. I looked up at the office floor through the glass walls. Everyone moved on like nothing had happened, while I'd been erased without a sound. The conference room buzzed with voices, familiar ones, too familiar. This was the Monday morning strategy session I used to lead, a meeting I'd spent 2 years shaping into a cornerstone for client wins. Process improvements, and real-time problem solving. Now, I stood at the head of the same long table, balancing a tray of coffee and muffins. Fresh brew, I said softly, placing a carafe in the center. No one responded. I didn't expect applause, but the silence was colder than I'd imagined. No one made eye contact. They shifted in their seats, adjusted pens, tapped tablets, as if my presence made the room too small. And there was Jamie, in my old seat, third chair from the end, right side. Beside the screen, the decision-maker's spot, a fresh nameplate sat in front of her, Jamie Tran, client lead. I paused a second too long. Her eyes flicked up, caught mine, then dropped to her notes. Not a nod, not a smile, just a flush of color on her cheeks and the rigid stillness of someone caught in guilt but too afraid to speak. I refilled cups, moved in practiced silence, poured for Owen last. Thanks, he muttered, not looking up from his tablet. No one asked how I was doing. No one mentioned that I'd trained most of them. No one acknowledged I was there, except the screen. The main slide read, Q3 Client Recovery Plan, presented by Jamie Tran. My stomach turned. These were my clients, ones I'd brought in, fought for, lost sleep over. Now their names were being sorted, analyzed, maybe handed off to junior staff while I stood there like a catering temp. As I gathered the tray to leave, I saw it, a pale yellow sticky note tucked under a coffee cup near the door. My name was written in Jamie's tidy handwriting. I glanced back, she was still staring ahead, hands folded. I slid the note into my blazer pocket and walked out. In the hallway, I unfolded the tiny square, I'm sorry. I didn't know until it was done. 5 words. The guilt hit like a second slap, not because of what she wrote, but because she'd written anything at all. She was trying, but trying didn't change the fact that she'd said yes to the seat I hadn't even been told I'd lost. I stood by the service counter, the scent of coffee clinging to my sleeves. Somewhere inside that room, someone was presenting a slide deck I'd built from scratch. I was out here, forgotten by a team I'd once carried on my back. I didn't quit. I didn't storm into Owen's office demanding answers. I didn't write a scathing email or cry in the bathroom. I didn't speak a word that wasn't strictly necessary. I just adjusted, or at least, that's what it looked like. Each morning, I arrived at 8:02 sharp, logged in, collected the day's requests, delivered documents. Organized catering, booked rooms for teams I used to lead. I moved through the hallways like a shadow, present, but overlooked. I learned to disappear in plain sight. No questions, no comments, no confrontation. But behind the silence, I was watching. I watched Jamie fumble her first external presentation, forgetting to loop in legal before a proposal went out. I watched Owen cover for her with the same polished indifference he'd used to dismiss me. I remembered every policy, every clause, every name. One afternoon, I stayed late, claiming I was waiting for a courier. The office was quiet, lights dimmed, most people gone. I opened the shared network folder and typed a search string I hadn't used in months, client contracts, Marinla, 2019-2023. There they were. All 5 contracts I'd negotiated, line by line, still stored in the backup archive, untouched, bearing my initials in the margins and my timestamped comments in tracked changes. I downloaded each file onto a flash drive, nothing fancy. Just a clean backup. Nothing illegal, nothing malicious, just a record. Because I knew something no one else seemed to remember, those contracts weren't just deals. They held power. Power in the form of clauses Owen had clearly never read. Clauses Jamie had never seen. Clauses I'd inserted after years of being burned, doubted, overruled. Like this one, in the event that the assigned lead project manager is reassigned without client consultation and approval, this contract may be terminated at the client's discretion. I'd written that line myself, back when I was considered too junior to push back when I knew I had to protect my work and myself. I ejected the flash drive, slipped it into my bag, and turned off the screen. No one saw. No one asked. The next morning, I poured coffee like nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew they'd made their first real mistake. And I was the only one who knew how expensive it would be. Each evening, after the office dimmed and the chatter faded into the elevator shaft, I returned to those contracts. Not just to read them, but to revisit the war stories they carried. These weren't just PDFs, they were proof of everything I'd built with my own hands, earned through sleepless nights, red-eye flights, and conference calls that stretched past 10:15 p.m. one by one. I opened them. Client A, Medical Logistics, signed March 2020. Client B, Data Security Services, signed August 2021. Client C, International Retail Expansion, signed 6 months ago. And so on. Every document had the same structure, but buried deep in the terms and conditions, page 17 or 18, was the line I'd fought for, argued for, sometimes snuck in when no one was looking closely. Client reserves the right to terminate this agreement without penalty in the event of a project lead reassignment without prior written approval. In plain English, if they removed me without permission, the client could walk away, no strings attached. At the time, people rolled their eyes. Legal called it unnecessary. Sales said it was overprotective. Owen, back when he was director of sales, had shrugged and said, "If it makes you feel better, fine." I scrolled to the signature pages. There it was, in all 5 contracts, signed by Owen Caldwell, his flawless digital signature and confident title beneath it. He'd approved every clause, every word, and now, he'd reassigned me without notifying a single client. He'd promoted someone who didn't even know those clauses existed. He'd lit the fuse. He just didn't know it yet. I leaned back in my chair, the monitor's glow reflecting off the office window like a ghost of the life I used to live. This wasn't revenge. It was precision. It was memory. It was the kind of control that doesn't shout but waits. The beauty of a trap isn't when it snaps shut, it's when no one realizes they've walked into it. I renamed the folder on my flash drive, Continuity Clauses, Critical. No one else had a copy. No one else remembered the line existed. But the clients would, when the time came. They'd notice, and they'd act. Until then, I poured coffee, took notes, booked rooms, and waited, calm, still, holding every thread in my hands. The first crack came quietly. It was a Thursday morning, 11:15, if I recall. I'd just returned from delivering documents to the executive floor when the office's rhythm shifted. You can always feel it when the air goes still, keyboards stop clicking, whispers dart across glass doors. By 11:30, emergency meeting invites were flying out. Subject, Client A, urgent alignment call. Location, Conference Room 3B. Attendees, Owen, Legal, Finance, Strategic Accounts. Not me, of course. But I printed their decks, aligned the chairs, poured the water. The room filled quickly, voices clipped, half-sentences sliding across the table. No one knew exactly what had gone wrong. Only that something had. I stood outside the glass walls, adjusting the coffee cart, watching as Jamie stumbled through the opening summary. Apparently, Client A, the one I'd onboarded 2 years ago, had sent a formal notice that morning, as of end of quarter, we will be terminating our agreement with Veritas Tech. No renewal will be considered. Owen sat at the head of the table, pale but posturing calm. We've been expecting some churn, he said. It's likely a budget cut. Healthcare sectors are tightening spend. I nearly scoffed but stayed silent. Client A wasn't budget sensitive, if anything, they were scaling up. After the meeting, I returned to my desk in the admin corner, where no one ever looked. That's when I saw it, a stray email left open on the shared print station, forgotten by someone who hadn't signed out. From Client A's procurement lead. Subject, Concerns regarding project transition. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. We've attempted to contact Marin regarding the Q4 rollout. We were unaware she was no longer involved. The current lead has failed to address our last 2 inquiries. We signed this contract with Marin. If she's been removed without consultation, we will exit as per Clause 14b. I froze. That was it. The clause. The one Owen had signed and forgotten. The one I'd written to protect exactly this kind of relationship. My fingers trembled slightly on the mouse, not with joy, not even satisfaction, but a cold that crept from my neck down my spine. They'd pulled the pin, and no one in that glass room knew the grenade was mid-air. I deleted the printer log, closed the window, and walked to the break room. The water felt too cold as I washed my hands, or maybe I couldn't feel warmth anymore. Either way, the first one was gone. The rest, I knew, would follow. By the following Tuesday, the cracks had become fractures. The second client pulled out just before lunch, 8 p.m. I heard it first through the silence. Phones stopped ringing, Slack channels went quiet. Owen stormed down the hallway, legal at his heels, face flushed, jaw locked. By 3:20, the third client followed. This one hit harder. They didn't just pull out, they demanded a refund on Q2 deliverables, citing breach of lead continuity and irrecoverable communication breakdown. 3 accounts gone in less than 5 business days, accounting for nearly 40% of our division's annual revenue. And still, no one said my name, not in meetings, not in memos. But my absence was becoming the ghost they were all trying not to see. I kept my head down, took notes during boardroom setups, reordered notepads and pens, kept breathing. The tension wrapped the building like fog. People whispered in corners. Jamie started arriving earlier, leaving later, her hands shaking when she printed talking points. I caught her once outside the copy room, staring into space, eyes glassy. Something was cracking, not just the company, but her. That night, I stayed late to sort supplies for the next morning's ops briefing. I left at 8:02 p.m., took the long way home, and didn't check my phone until I was in bed. One new message from Jamie, I think you need to know. Owen's trying to pin this on you. I read it 3 times, thinking I'd misunderstood. Then my stomach knotted, sharp and sudden. I typed back, what do you mean? Her reply came instantly, he said the contracts were written wrong, that you handled them without proper oversight. He's prepping a summary for the board. He's calling it legacy risk. Legacy risk. His way of saying, let's blame the person who isn't in the room anymore. My jaw tightened. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. He was unraveling, the pressure closing in, and like most fragile leaders, his instinct was to throw someone under the bus to save his image. I was the easiest target, the ghost in the system, the name erased from the chart. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I didn't need a desk or a title to defend myself. I had the documents. I had the signatures. And now, I had Jamie. The boardroom at 9:25 a.m. was heavy with tension, the air sharp and still. I carried a tray of bottled water, a stack of agendas, and a silence I wore like armor. No small talk, no chatter, just heads down, eyes glued to graphs that looked more like obituaries than strategy reports. The emergency meeting had been called after the third client exit, with only the highest level decision makers present, senior VPs, legal, finance, even a board member. I wasn't on the attendee list, but I was there, moving quickly, setting down bottles, smoothing handouts, aligning the projector. Just another helper, blending into the background. Then Owen spoke, his voice calm but strained. Look, we're seeing fallout from legacy practices. Contracts weren't standardized. The transition from Marin's oversight didn't go smoothly, and we're paying for it now. My hand froze mid-reach for the last bottle. He'd said my name, not to credit, but to blame. I didn't turn, didn't react, just stepped back into the corner, clipboard pressed to my side, eyes low. He continued, pacing. She had complete control over those accounts. No documentation trail for client preferences, no standardization in the clauses. Jamie's had to rebuild everything from scratch. A few heads nodded, others looked skeptical. One sighed audibly. Then a voice, low, dry, cut through the room. Funny, her name still CC'd in the original contracts. It was Mr. Layton, board advisor, rarely seen, even more rarely heard. Everyone turned. He tapped his contract summary. In fact, her version tracked every clause, every communication, every revision. Who approved these again? He looked straight at Owen. Owen blinked. I mean, I signed off, but the language. You signed off, Mr. Layton said, not raising his voice. He didn't need to. Silence blanketed the table. I stood still, like furniture, as suspicion shifted, not toward me, but away. I said nothing, because I didn't need to. I gathered the empty tray, turned, and stepped out just as the voices inside grew sharp, defensive, unraveling. The hallway carpet muffled my shoes. It wasn't justice yet, but for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like control. At 8:40 the next morning, I was setting up bottled water in the executive boardroom when the CEO's assistant found me. She didn't smile, didn't ask if I had a moment. Marin, the board wants to see you. Right now. I froze for half a second, then nodded, no questions. I wiped my palms on my blazer and followed her past the glass walls I hadn't stepped behind in weeks. Inside, 7 people sat around the mahogany table. At the far end was Owen, suit wrinkled, hair flattened, face pale and unreadable. They motioned for me to sit. No small talk. Mr. Layton slid a paper across the table. You should read this. It was a printed email, brief and unmistakable. Subject, Contingency Clause Reinstatement Request. To CEO, Veritas Tech. We have reviewed the current situation across all 5 of our accounts. We are willing to reconsider termination contingent upon the reinstatement of Marinla as our primary project lead. If this cannot be met, we will pursue new partnerships effective immediately. Signed, clients A, B, C, D, and E. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because my chest ached in a way it hadn't in weeks. 5 clients, unified, demanding my return, not as a favor, but a requirement. When I looked up, I caught uncertainty in Owen's eyes, a flicker he couldn't hide. Mr. Layton leaned forward. Marin, we owe you more than an apology. We failed to see what you built and protected. The board has agreed to reinstate you immediately as Director of Strategic Accounts, with full authority to choose your team and double your previous salary. The room was silent, heavy with implication. I didn't look at Owen. I looked at the chairman. I want it in writing, I said calmly. And I decide who stays and who goes. A beat passed, then a nod. Done. I stood, straightened my blazer, and walked out without drama. I didn't smile until I reached the hallway. This wasn't about revenge or even the title. It was about being seen, being heard, and knowing I didn't need to shout to be powerful. I didn't take the offer. The title was restored. The salary doubled, the board practically bent over backward. But I was already gone by the time their apology reached me. Over the next week, I took 5 phone calls from 5 clients, the same ones who'd walked out when I was replaced. This time, they weren't asking me to return as a point of contact. They were offering more. We trust you, one said, not just with our contracts, but our vision. They didn't want me as an employee, they wanted me as a partner. When the final proposal came through, funding, infrastructure support, a shared stake in a new consultancy, I felt something crack open in my chest. Freedom. Real, terrifying, beautiful freedom. No gatekeepers, no performance reviews, no one to erase my name from a chart. Just me and the people who saw what I brought to the table. 2 weeks later, I walked into a small co-working space downtown. Bright windows, simple furniture, the quiet hum of new beginnings. I placed my laptop on the center desk, logged in, and opened a fresh document. Marin. This time, we build it together. I never got the raise I asked for. I got something better, a company that couldn't function without me, then a company that thrived because of me. If you've ever been silenced, sidelined, or underestimated, remember this: you don't have to burn the building down. You can build your own. Have you ever walked away and found your voice? Share below. If this story moved you, like it, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real workplace stories that end with power, not pity.